You know that great Bill Murray line from the end of Ghostbusters? Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. It's like that, but a card game. Hey guys, welcome back. Today I want to do a quick review, or a slightly longer than a quick review, of this chonky boy right here. This is Smash Up, but more particularly this is the Big Geeky Box, which is an expansion holster box for the game Smash Up and its many expansion sets. If you're not familiar with Smash Up is a pretty fun, zany game in concept. It's a card game, it's competitive, and it's basically what if we took monsters and creatures and characters from as many different genres as possible and mishmashed them together to create weird team combinations, and then had those weird teams compete against each other to take control of bases, and those bases were locations that were also from many different genres. And so this box is meant to house the base game, and I think it actually fits all of the expansions so far. I'm missing, I think, the two most recent expansions, but I think we have everything else up until, I want to say they release like 2 a year. And I think we have all of them up through 2018. I don't think we have the 2019 stuff. So looking at the base set, and I have, these are all the different rule books from all the different expansions. Not that the rules are very complex, and not that you really need these to understand how to play the expansions, but it's kind of nice because each one has the artwork and the description of the different factions that each expansion added. And so the first base set, you can see here, pretty sure this is the base set book. The base set included aliens, dinosaurs, ninjas, pirates, robots, tricksters, which are basically fae or fairies, wizards, and zombies. I believe the only one that was sort of, I guess you could call it copyright specific out of this base set was wizards. They are very clearly Harry Potter. I mean, even so much so that the symbol for wizards is an owl. I don't know if you can see that there. But yeah, I might go through some of the cards in a bit, but yeah, wizards from the base set are very much Harry Potter. All the rest, I think, are like generic, like pirates, aliens, ninjas. Those are all generic. The aliens have a touch of Mars attacks to them, but it's still pretty generic. And so the idea is that you'll pick two of those factions, I guess I'll call them factions. Each one is 20 cards, so it's two mini decks. You shuffle them completely together, and that is your deck for the game. So you've got a 40-card deck mixed up of the two factions that you chose. Factions all have a kind of flavor and feel to the way that they behave in-game, but the mechanics of the game are simple. The actual baseline rules are simple, and the same across the board. It's just the types of actions and specials that the different factions have that make them kind of feel unique. And so mixing them together, you can get a lot of really weird combinations as far as rules mechanics go. And so once everybody has their 40-card deck, you shuffle out the bases. Bases are the locations that you fight over. The rules state that you're supposed to have one base per player plus one. So if you had 3 players, you'd have 4 bases. I find that to be okay until you hit about, I mean, honestly, if you went past 4 bases or maybe 5 bases, the game starts to really drag out. I feel like because there's just so much going on. I mean, maybe it's the way we play it, but we can get in that later. But basically, yeah, so you're playing creatures or monsters, they're actually called minions is the sort of blanket term, onto these bases, these locations, in order to battle over them. Then there's a scoring mechanic that explains who wins the base in the end. Winning the base triggers a special ability that usually benefits the person who got the highest score while that base was scoring. We'll get into that. And also you get points, and those points are essentially your VP. The first person to get to 15 wins the game. So before we get further into the mechanics and gameplay, I want to go through the rest of these different factions from the expansions, because that's kind of the coolest part of the game, that you can mix and match those things. I'm not going to go through these specifically in the order that they came out in, because I frankly can't remember the order that they came out in. Let me try here. So I know one of the earlier ones was this one right here, Monster Mash, or Monster Smash, I should say. And Monster Smash adds giant ants, so like your classic 1950s black and white science fiction movies, mad scientists, similar but more in the Frankenstein field of things, vampires, obviously classic movie vampires, it's kind of classic golden age of Hollywood stuff, and werewolves. And so those are 4 new factions in there. I'm pretty sure this one was also close towards the beginning. Science fiction double features. Again, kind of pinning on that 1950s, 1960s drive-through golden age of Hollywood horror era. You've got cyborg apes, shapeshifters, super spies, and time travelers. I don't believe any of those... Well, Super Spies has a loose connection off of a James Bond feel, but I don't think any of those are specific to any movie franchise. It looks like there's actually a little bit of Austin Powers thrown into the Spies as well, but I don't think any of the rest of those are from anything specific. The obligatory Cthulhu set, which is exactly what it sounds like. This is actually 4 Lovecraftian-based factions. If you don't know H.P. Lovecraft, learn yourself some H.P. Lovecraft. That's all I'm going to say about that. So there's Minions of Cthulhu, Elder Things, Innsmouth, and Miskatonic University. I really can't explain those any better than those names. If you don't know what those are, please go read a lot of H.P. Lovecraft. If you're any kind of a nerd or geek, you should. You just should. Gatekeeping Lovecraft, I guess. So then we've got, I think this one was also near the beginning, Awesome Level 9000. And this one adds Bear Cavalry, which is like a Soviet USSR soldiers riding bears. That's pretty great. Ghosts, Killer Plants, and Steampunk. If I remember correctly, Steampunk has some very broken stuff inside of it, depending on how you mix and match it. Then trying to, again, continue in order as best I can remember, we've got It's Your Fault. And I specifically remember the best part about this is they basically made it possible to play Sharknado. I may not have come across the thing that it pairs with yet, but we'll go through this. So this adds, there we go, dragons, mythic Greeks, I was mixing up a later faction. Dragons, mythic Greeks, sharks, superheroes, and tornadoes. So in this same set, they added sharks and they added tornadoes. Yes, tornadoes as a playable faction. And let's see here. I believe they wrote it in here somewhere. Tornadoes. Okay, so it's actually under the Tornadoes faction descriptor. Okay, yes, we hope you get the obvious joke, but hey, tornadoes are pretty awesome in this game, not as much as in real life. Get ready to spread minions all over the place with these excellent shark delivery systems. So, kind of the name of the set, It's Your Fault, and it actually says in a little blurb right here, shark delivery system included. So, starting to get a little silly now. I mean, it was already pretty silly to begin with, but now we're getting really silly. Pretty smash up. Adds a bunch of cute things. So new factions include fairies, although we did already have tricksters, which were, I guess they're more like garden gnomes. Fairies are like legitimate fairies. Mythic horses are very much My Little Pony, like not spot on My Little Pony. Kitty cats is cats, with a lot of internet references like Angry Cat and Grumpy Cat. And princesses, which are very much Disney princesses. I don't think I missed anything as far as faction connections in here. Superheroes has a lot of Marvel references, obviously the Sharknado thing. I don't think Dragons has any direct references, and Mythic Greeks is just a lot of like Greek gods and famous Greek fables. Cease and Desist. This is titled such because there's a lot of stuff in here that fringes right on the edge of copyright. And you'll see why. So Astroknights, that's Jedi and Star Wars. Changebots is Transformers. Ignobles is Dungeons and Dragons. Sorry, no. Ignobles is Game of Thrones. And Star Roamers is Star Trek. And they're all very, very obvious if you were to look at the cards and the card art. And then the last expansion we have, at least I think the last expansion we have, is Smash Up Big in Japan. And this adds a bunch of Japanese culture type stuff into the game. So we've got Mega Troopers, that's Power Rangers. We've got Magical Girls, that's an entire genre of anime. We've got Kaiju, that's your typical classic, giant monster movie, Godzilla. And we've got Itty Critters, which are actually Pokemon. And again, pretty spot on the nose Pokemon. So those are the expansions that we have plus the base set. They all fit in here very nicely with these hard card dividers. I don't think we have them alphabetically. I think we used to have them alphabetically and we don't anymore. But hopefully you can see this somewhat. These are all hard card dividers, and then in between them are the 20 card decks for the individual factions. Over here you've got some tokens, which are used for keeping score. Again, hopefully you can see these to some extent. But they're basically 1s, 5s, and 10s for tracking score, because when you get to 15, the game ends. And then there's a large chunk here of bases. And bases, pull this guy out. And I should say every expansion set comes with new bases. So you've got your base set bases, and then you've got your expansion bases. And all of them are in the flavor of the new factions that get added. I'll see if I can find one that's super specific to a faction that you guys might recognize. Let's see. The Gray Opal is meant to be like the Black Pearl from Pirates of the Caribbean, so that's obviously a pirate reference. The Homeworld is an alien one. Winter Squashed is Game of Thrones, so what would the opposite of Winter Squash be? Summer something. But that's what they're making a reference to. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of punny type stuff. Tar Pits, Shark Reef, Palooza. Anyways, lots of bases, all equally as referential or insider joke as the factions themselves. Two other additions is when you buy the big geeky box, you also get the faction geeks, which are a direct reference to the people that make and play the game. So I think there's some cards in there that reference gaming conventions, that reference hacking, that reference, all kinds of gamer-related jokes and stuff like that, puns. It's a very punny game. And then specifically with the obligatory Cthulhu set, there are madness cards. Again, if you don't know H.P. Lovecraft and you don't know Lovecraftian lore, madness, like going crazy from the things that you've seen and witnessed, the horrors, that's a very, very commonplace thing. And so it introduces madness cards, which are kind of like penalty VP that you can stick out there through gameplay if you're using the Lovecraftian, one of the 4 Lovecraftian factions. So those are the factions, the expansions. Getting back to gameplay, it's super simple. I'm just going to flip the core rulebook over here as a quick reference for myself. Setup is you pick your 2 decks, you shuffle them together, you get your 40 card deck. Each one is 20. The way that we like to do it is we start with one person, we each choose one deck going around the table, and then, one faction, and then we go around a second time and each choose our second faction. That way one person can't pick the 2 they want right off the bat. That would be a little overpowered, because there are some overpowered combinations. Zombies and robots in particular, which is strange because they're both base set factions. When you pair them together, are very, very powerful, and it has to do, if I can recall, with the combination of being able to bring things back from the graveyard and play multiple minions in the same turn due to robot sort of multiplying special powers. And so there's this constant, things on the field multiplying and things coming back from the graveyard because there's zombies, and you end up with tons of minions that you can just pump out onto the field. And you can kill your own stuff and it doesn't matter because you just pull it back. It gets very, you can really screw with stuff. So we go around, each player draws one faction deck, and then we go around again, each player draws a second, you shuffle them together, that's your starting deck. You put bases out on the board. Like I was saying, it says 1 base plus 1 for the total number of players. So a 3-player game would have 4 bases, a 4-player game would have 5 bases. Because the game only holds together as long as bases are being competed for, if you have too many bases, 2 things can happen. One, and I feel like it's never right down the middle, it's always one of these extremes and it sucks either way. One, there end up being bases that nobody's competing for, or one person is going for, and they essentially end up triggering the victory condition for that base and winning it on their own without anybody actually opposing them, which makes it too easy and the game ends too soon. Or everybody starts to pile onto bases evenly, and basically you just counter each other. It's like tic-tac-toe theory. As soon as somebody picks one, you counter there, and then they pick another one and you counter there, and then they pick another one and you counter there. And so nobody ever gets anywhere, and the game just drags and drags and drags. I feel like 3 or 4 bases, regardless of the number of players, works great because it focuses competition, and there's no way of preventing bases from scoring with that many people focusing on one base. So you hit this kind of sweet spot of it not taking too long for bases to score, and also bases not being completely ignored so that somebody can just slip in and steal them. So I like 3 or 4 bases no matter what, and I feel like that works fine. But you play the game however you like. So on your turn, your starting hand is 5 cards, max hand size is 10 cards. Everybody draws, and then you start with the person who woke up earliest that morning, and you go clockwise. During your turn, it basically goes like this. If you have any cards in play that say at start of turn, those effects happen. Then you get to play 1 or 2, 0 or 1 or 2 cards. You basically get to play a minion, an action, or a minion and an action. Those are the only 2 types of cards in general. Some have special rules, some are a little more simple, but basically a minion is a creature or a monster or a character that goes onto a base in order to fight for it so that you can win it and get the scoring points. And an action is like a one-time effect. Some are ongoing, which means they stay in play, and it'll tell you specifically where they stay in play. But actions are basically events that happen, and then minions are creatures that go onto bases. So you play one or neither or both of those cards in any order, doing any special things that they say. Some will actually trigger more plays. Some minions say play an extra minion, some actions say play an extra action or play another minion, things like that. Basically do whatever the cards say. After you've played your cards, you draw 2 cards regardless of the number of cards that you played. So even if you play none, you still draw 2. Max hand size is 10, so once you draw, if you have more than 10, discard till you have 10. And then you trigger any, then you see if there are any bases that are scoring. I'll get back to that in a second. And then you do any cards that have at the end of your turn effects, and those effects go off. So if at that point when you reach the scoring check, so you've already done beginning of turn stuff, you've played cards if you wanted to, you've drawn cards, you've discarded if need be. Now you check to see if bases score. If there is any base that meets its scoring value, that base begins to score. We call it a trigger value, I think. So this base here, for example, is called Juice Bar. So it's got 3 things on it that are important. I'll show it to you as best I can. It's, 4 things. So hopefully you can see this okay. But it's got a scoring number in the corner here. It's got a name. It's got 3 score values across the middle. And then it's got an ability down the bottom. Focus on the card here. Come on, camera. Yeah, okay. So this one is scores at 20 points. It's called Juice Bar. The scoring values are 3, 2, and 1. And then the ability is before this base scores, each player with a minion here gains +2 power here for each special ability they use before scoring. That's a complicated one, but I'll get to that. So the main thing here is the trigger for scoring is 20 points. That's the number in the upper left corner. That means that if between all the creatures, all the minions on this base, yours and or whoever, every opponent's, all of the minions that are on this base, if their combined power is equal to or greater than 20, this base begins to score. Going forward from that point, once you decide this base is scoring, not decide, but once you've determined this base is scoring, even if something happens that removes minions from the base that would lower the total power at that base to below the scoring point, the base continues to score. It's like a meltdown process. Once it starts, it's happening. The numbers in the middle, 3, 2, 1, going left to right, is first place points, second place points, third place points. That is determined by who has the most power at that base. So if I have 4 minions there with a total of 8 power, and you have, well, this one scores at 20, so let's say you have 5 minions there with a total of 12 power, thus a combined total between me and you of 20, which is why it triggered scoring. You are obviously in first. You have a total of 12 power there, I have a total of 8 power there, you have more there than I do, so you are first, I am second, there is nobody in third. If nothing changed throughout the scoring process, you would get 3 points, I would get 2 points, because looking at this base's scoring values, it's 3, 2, 1. And nobody gets that last one because there's nobody for third place. If there's a tie for any position, say we have the same number of points, we both get that level of points. So if we tied for first, we both get 3. If there was a third person and they beat both of us somehow, they would get first, and we were tied, we would both get second. So you get whatever you got. You get whatever you're supposed to get, even on a tie. And then finally, that last bit, the ability. Before this base scores, each player with a minion here gains +2 power here for each special ability they use before scoring. Okay, so before this base scores, meaning once it's triggered, but before you actually calculate final scores, each player with a minion here, obviously if you and I had that 8 points and 12 points worth of minions, we have minions there. Each player with a minion here gains +2 power here for each special ability that they use before scoring. Special abilities are written onto minion cards, and they will say something like, before a base scores, or when a base is scoring, or something like that. It'll specifically say, like, once a base begins to score. Those are special abilities. The way those are triggered is once we determine that a base is now scoring, say it's my turn, and on my turn we determine that we're now at or over 20 points and the base is scoring. Starting with me, and going clockwise around the table, anybody that has a special on a card that could be affected by that base scoring can choose to use that special. So I look at all my minions, not just on that base, but on the entire board. And if I have any that could be affected by that base scoring, I can activate those specials. So for example, if it said, before a base that this minion is on scores, obviously the minion needs to be on the base that's scoring. But if it just says, before any base scores, do something, that minion could be elsewhere. It just has to be on the board, and I could use that special. I believe there's one on sharks or tornadoes that says, before any base scores, move this minion to that base. So it just sort of like jumps into the fray and joins the fight. So starting with me, because it's the scoring triggered on my turn, and going around the table, everybody gets a chance to play a special. As long as at least one person plays a special, we go around the table again. So you can defer using a special and then choose to use it later in that same scoring as long as somebody else has done something. It's almost like in poker, how as long as somebody bet, you get to go around again to try to match their bet. Or raised. I don't play a lot of poker, but you get what I'm saying. So if I didn't use a special, and then this guy didn't use a special, but then you did, and then this person doesn't, I get another chance to say, okay, now I want to use a special because somebody in the circle, being you, did. And then so does this guy, and then you get another chance. We keep going around until we do one entire loop where nobody chose to use a special. That essentially means nobody has any specials to use or wants to use. And then scoring triggers. So we look at total power of minions on the base, mine, yours, anybody else's. Whoever has the most combined power of their own minions, plus any bonuses that they have, gets the first place points, which on this base is 3, and then the next person would get 2, and the next person would get 1. And we would factor in that the ability, which is before this base scores, each player with minions here gets +2 power for each special ability that they used. So again, if I didn't use anything, he didn't use anything, you used one, they didn't use anything, comes back to me, nothing, 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 nothing. The only person that used one is you. You would get +2 total to your total power, and then we would score. Once the base is scored, it's removed from play and replaced with a new base, and play continues. And you go around the table like that. So I know that was a lot to take in, but that's like the entire game. That's basically all the rules. So the turn is super simple, deck building is super simple. It gets really intricate when you start to mix the weird mechanics of the different factions together, and then on top of that, you have 2 factions mixed together, and another person might have 2 factions mixed together, and the interactions between those 4 factions, plus the base effects, can get really weird. And that's why I said I really don't like having more than 3 or 4 bases in play, because when you've already got 2 factions that are doing weird stuff together, fighting against 2 factions that are doing weird stuff together, at a base that's also doing weird stuff to all 4 of them, there are so many levels of complexity already going on. To have 5 different bases in play and 3 other players, it just starts to get nuts and the game takes forever. So I like 3 or 4 players, and I like 3 or 4 bases. And going beyond that seems to get a little intense. I think we've gone up to 5 players, but if you think about that, 5 players and 6 bases, there's so much going on. The game's gonna take like 3 or 4 hours. But that's just how we play it anyways. So yeah, this has been Smash Up. This is most of the expansions. Like I said, I think there are 2 expansions that we have not purchased that we plan on purchasing because we like the game. We don't always feel in the mood to play it because it can tend to drag depending on the factions chosen and the people playing the game and how they're playing it. Because you can play in kind of a dickish way, just like any other competitive, loosey-goosey card game. But yeah, I like it. I think it's a fun game. It's certainly it's got a fun level of collectability to it because whenever you see a new expansion come out, it's kind of like, oh, awesome, they added that. That's hilarious. And you grab it and you play it for a couple months after that to try in the new stuff. And then you kind of get bored with it. And then a few months go by and another expansion comes out and you'll be at the game store and you'll be like, oh, look, another one. Oh, look what they added. That's hilarious. And so you'll buy it and you'll play for a few more months. And it's got a good way of kind of bubbling back up into your rotation. And it's a lot of fun and it's silly. Yeah. So yeah, this is Smash Up. Definitely check it out if you haven't yet. At the very least, buy the base set. The base set is perfectly great to play with 3 to 4 people. It's got enough factions for that. And if you like that, I think the expansions, the base game is like $25. The expansions are like 20 or 15 bucks on top of that, depending on where you find them. So yeah, check it out. Anyways, thanks for watching this review. I hope you've enjoyed. If you haven't yet, go down below, subscribe, comment, like, and I will see you guys in the next video. Have a good day.